Welcome to the Chopin channel. I'm Roberto Poli. Chopin was incensed when he learned that without his consent, Christian Rudolf Wessel, the German-born English publisher, had given the title The Infernal Banquet to his Scherzo in B minor, opus 20. Unbeknownst to him, the London firm had begun assigning suggestive titles to his works as early as 1833, when their agreement with the composer was signed. The strategy was meant to boost sales, especially when the music itself hinted at exotic associations. Chopin Bolero Opus 19, for example, became Souvenir of Andalusia. The early Rondo in C minor, Opus 1, on its publication in 1836, was titled Farewell to Warsaw, and each set of mazurkas appeared as Souvenir of Poland. Even the nocturnes were not spared. Murmurs of the Seine for Opus 9, the Zephyrs, Opus 15, the Plaintive Ones for Opus 27, and Il Lamento e la Consolazione for Opus 32. The Infernal Banquet, a fantastical vision of demise, must have appealed strongly to English audiences of the mid-1830s. Chopin's horror at Wessel's titles is expressed in a brief note that Chopin sent to Julian Fontana from Nohant in 1841. Wessel is a rogue. I will never send him anything more after Les Agréments au Salon. Perhaps you don't know that he has given that title to my second impromptu, or one of the waltzes. It was actually the second impromptu, opus 36, that received that title. After the letter to Fontana, Wessel must have received a letter of complaint from Chopin, because the programmatic titles disappeared, with one remarkable exception, the mazurkas, which remained Souvenir of Poland. Today, the title The Infernal Banquet might strike us as ludicrous. Yet, the images it evokes are not without significance when we consider the dilemma posed by the contrast between content and title. The word scherzo, the Italian word for joke or prank, still puzzles those who ask why Chopin's four monumental works bear this name. The critics of his time already struggled with that incongruence. In 1835, Robert Schumann famously asked, "How is gravity to clothe itself if humor goes about in such dark veils?" Friedrich Niecks, Chopin's biographer, dismissed the title of Opus 20 as a misnomer and concluded that there were better things to do than carping at a name, as he put it. Nearly 2 centuries later, the conundrum remains. How can a joke be so tragic, violent, and barbaric? Why would Chopin label these works scherzi when they bear so little relation to the lightness and playfulness that we generally find in the works by the same title in Beethoven and Schubert? Did Wessel, with his clumsy yet clever marketing strategy, simply attempt to rationalize the incongruence? In a recent conversation, a pianist colleague argued that the notion of a joke in Chopin's scherzi lies in their abrupt and unpredictable shifts of mood. That is the joke, she said. Well, her description may fit the quirky introduction and sudden changes of the Scherzo in B flat minor, opus 31, for example. Or the mercurial opening of the Scherzo in C sharp minor, opus 39. Yet the idea falters in the Scherzo in E major, opus 54, which departs so radically from that model that it might deserve another title altogether. And in the Scherzo in B minor, opus 20, the contrasts emerge mainly between the outer sections and the trio, a pattern no different from other works that are not called scherzo, such as the Etude opus 25 number 10, composed in the same period and bearing the same key and mode change in the middle section from B minor to B major. The scherzo had first appeared in Beethoven's time, possibly as a replacement for the old minuet, though its function remained tentative at first. In 1802, in the sonata in E-flat major, opus 31, number 3, in fact, Beethoven placed a scherzo alongside a minuet, with the minuet perhaps intended to act as the slow movement. Only gradually in the early 19th century did the scherzo take front stage, but we see how Chopin's early sonata in C minor, opus 4 from 1828, still contains a minuet, and Schubert's late sonata in C minor, D 958, written also in 1828, likewise features a minuet. Schubert also wrote two standalone scherzi in B-flat major and D-flat major, written around 1817, published posthumously and rarely performed today. Despite their autonomy, their proportions are modest, comparable to the scherzi found in his sonatas such as those in A major D 959 and B-flat major D 960. In both Beethoven and Schubert, a scherzo for piano lasts 3 to 5 minutes. Chopin doubled or nearly tripled the scale. By the early 1830s, Chopin was increasingly concerned with form. In the Ballade in G minor, opus 23, written alongside the B minor scherzo, he reimagined sonata form with an abridged recapitulation that bypasses the return of the first theme. Smaller works continued to favor ABA structures, but when tackling larger structures, Chopin often reshaped form in ingenious ways. The scherzo in B minor follows the expected ABA with coda, but what shocks us is not the structure, but the content. A savage chase full of dissonances so harsh that they must have startled the first listeners, raising a few eyebrows and perhaps prompting a few shrugs. As I study Chopin's music, one of the things I frequently think about is whether he conceived certain parts of a piece first. For example, in the case of the Ballade in G minor, which we just mentioned, I'm quite sure that the idea for the first theme, and perhaps even the second theme, came first before the introduction was created. I discussed this idea in my second book on notation, It's About Time, in which I argued that the various values in the introduction, the half note followed by eighth notes, the placement of rests, and the length of measure 7, were all planned around the 8 measure structure that he had in mind. The same can be observed in the case of the introduction of the Barcarolle and in other works, and of course in the opening 8 measures of the Scherzo in B minor. I also suspect that Chopin worked out at least some of the material of a piece before settling on a title for it. It's not that Chopin woke up one day, sat at the piano, and proclaimed, "Today I'm going to compose a scherzo." I'm convinced that he worked out the opening section of the Scherzo in B minor before he decided or even understood what to call it. And as he defined the opening section, writing a fast-paced work of this kind incurred a problem. There isn't a genre or a category, if you will, in which this music would fall. He then must have realized that framing it within an ABA structure would have given him some options. And perhaps the music we hear in the B section, with contrasting lyrical material, was composed even before the opening section and was eventually adapted to fit within the work, that we may never know, of course. The scherzo, as modeled in Beethoven's sonatas and symphonies, was the only available genre that offered such an ABA outline. And so, despite the incongruous in the title, joke, prank, versus the violent, even barbaric material of the A section, or even the lyrical B section evoking a Polish Christmas carol, as we know, Chopin may have adopted it out of necessity. And in doing so, he created a new genre, that of the standalone scherzo for piano, a genre that affected ensuing generations. Had he embraced programmatic titles, the Infernal Banquet for the first scherzo, for instance, we would still discuss the extraordinary music of Opus 20, and perhaps I suspect that Niecks wouldn't think that we would be wasting time carping at a name.